My name is Helena Marlowe. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a seamstress. People have always called me patient, meticulous, maybe even stubborn, someone who could spend hours sewing a hem straight or waiting quietly for others to come around to reason. I believed patience was a virtue, but patience has its breaking point. On Christmas Eve of 2024, mine came. The house smelled of turkey and cloves, warm bread cooling on the counter, the kind of scents that used to mean celebration. I had been helping in the kitchen all afternoon, peeling potatoes, rinsing greens, polishing the good silver Kara had insisted on using. My son Daniel had set out the wine glasses, while their children, Ava and little Mark, ran circles around the table laughing in that way only children do when Christmas lights glow. For one fragile moment, I allowed myself to believe this would be the holiday when we remembered what it meant to be a family. I carried my plate with a smile as Kara carved the turkey. Daniel poured wine, his voice smooth as he toasted, "To family." I raised my glass too, feeling the words settle warmly in my chest. Then I stepped forward with my plate. The knife in Kara's hand gleamed under the chandelier. She set it down, pressed her palm against the rim of my dish, and stopped me from moving it closer to the turkey. Her eyes were cold, her voice sharp enough to cut the room in two. "You didn't contribute to this dinner, Helena, so you don't eat." The sound of forks and glasses froze. My plate trembled in my hands, though I gripped it tightly enough for my knuckles to blanch. Ava's chatter fell into silence. Mark's legs dangled beneath his chair, stilling in confusion. I stared at Kara, waiting for a sign that it was a cruel joke, but her mouth was set, her gaze steady. Daniel lifted his glass again, pretending to sip, not meeting my eyes. He said nothing. The weight of the silence pressed down harder than her words. I could hear the faint hum of the heater, the scratch of a chair leg on hardwood, the shallow breath of my grandson as he tried to understand why Grandma wasn't allowed food. I wanted to speak to remind her I had folded linens, scrubbed dishes, even bought gifts for her children, wrapped and waiting beneath the tree. But my throat locked. Every word I might have said felt too small against the humiliation. So I stood there, a guest at my own son's table, holding an empty plate, while the family around me went on uncertain, uneasy. Kara returned to carving the turkey as if nothing had happened. Daniel reached for the potatoes. The room began moving again, but for me, time had stopped. I lowered the plate slowly, setting it down on the edge of the table. My hands trembled, but I kept my back straight. The smell of food no longer felt warm. It turned bitter, heavy in my lungs. I sat down, silent, invisible, while the others continued to eat. And in that stillness beneath the flicker of Christmas lights, I felt the first crack in the patience I had built my life upon. The clink of silverware filled the air again, as if Kara's words had never been spoken. But they hung there, invisible and sharp, cutting me with every shallow breath I drew. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, waiting, hoping that someone would say something to undo the humiliation. Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on his plate. He forked a piece of turkey, chewed and swallowed, as if silence were the safest shield he had. My son, the boy I had raised to speak truth, even when it was hard, sat across from me, mute. The quiet between us widened until it felt like a canyon. Kara smirked as she poured gravy onto her plate, her movements slow and deliberate. She knew she had won whatever battle she thought we were fighting. Her smirk was a signature, the kind she used whenever she believed she had proven her superiority. Robert, her brother, sat beside Daniel. His presence at holiday dinners had become common in recent years, though he contributed nothing but his appetite and his commentary. He shoveled potatoes into his mouth without glancing at me, his chewing steady, unbothered. The only sound he made was a satisfied grunt as he reached for another slice of turkey. To him, my humiliation was nothing more than background noise, something to ignore while he filled his stomach. I looked at Ava, sweet Ava, only 9 years old, her wide brown eyes darting between me and her mother. She was old enough to sense that something was wrong, too young to understand why no one was defending me. Her small hand tightened around her fork until her knuckles turned white. She didn't eat. She just watched me, confusion clouding her face as if she were trying to memorize the moment. Beside her, little Mark stuffed a roll into his mouth, still too young to comprehend. His laughter had vanished, replaced by nervous silence, his legs swinging under the table. The Christmas tree in the corner blinked cheerfully, strands of colored lights, reflecting against the polished ornaments I had helped hang. The angel on top tilted slightly, as though even she couldn't bear to watch. The decorations mocked me with their promise of joy. I could no longer taste the air in the room. My tongue felt heavy, my throat dry. The warmth of the food, the laughter of the children, the toast to family, all of it had evaporated, leaving only a suffocating stillness. Slowly, I pushed back my chair. The scrape of the legs against hardwood startled no one. No one looked up, not even Daniel, my own son. I rose, placing my napkin neatly on the table as though nothing had happened. My chair stood empty behind me. I thought perhaps that would wake them, that the sight of me walking away, plate untouched, might jar some instinct of decency. But Daniel kept eating. Kara laughed softly at something Robert said, as if the conversation had resumed without a missing beat. I climbed the staircase slowly, each step creaking beneath my weight. My knees ached, but I did not pause. At the landing, I turned my head once more. From above, the dining room glowed warmly. The family gathered, as though the seat I had abandoned had never been mine. My room greeted me with stillness. I closed the door gently behind me and leaned against it, feeling the hollowness inside my chest. The small, artificial tree I had decorated that morning for the children stood in the corner, its white lights twinkling merrily. A red ribbon I had tied with my own hands curled across the dresser. I sank onto the bed, my palms pressed against my knees. The muffled sounds of cutlery and conversation drifted through the floorboards, normal, ordinary, as though the woman upstairs did not exist. The glow of my tree blurred as tears filled my eyes. I brushed them away, not wanting even my own reflection in the dresser mirror to see me weep. Christmas was meant to be a night of belonging, yet here I was, sitting alone in the same house where I had folded linens, peeled potatoes, and tied ribbons, left invisible in a room that had never truly been mine. The silence in that dining room had spoken louder than any insult Kara could throw, and it echoed in my chest long after the sounds of their laughter carried up the stairs. I lay on the bed that Christmas Eve, the laughter and chatter muffled beneath the floorboards, and memory crept in like a draft from an old window. It carried me back 3 years to the day I packed up the house David and I had lived in for 40 years. I can still see Kara standing in my doorway, then her hands folded neatly, her smile practiced. "You'll never be alone, Helena. We'll take care of you. You'll have family around." Those words had sounded like a promise, like a balm for the hollow ache of widowhood. David had been gone barely 6 months. I was fragile, brittle as glass, afraid of the empty rooms in our Lincoln Park apartment. So when Daniel insisted, when Kara pressed her hand over mine and said I would be welcome, it felt less like a choice and more like relief. I told myself I would find comfort in their noise, in the presence of my grandchildren, in the company of people who loved me. The first weeks were tender enough. Ava would crawl into my lap with her storybooks, and little Mark, still in diapers, would toddle toward me with his arms outstretched. I cooked for them, mended their clothes, hummed the same lullabies I had once sung to Daniel. It almost felt like a new purpose had taken root. But the tone began to shift, almost imperceptibly, like fabric unraveling stitch by stitch. 2 weeks after I moved in, Kara mentioned casually over coffee, "The electricity bill's higher this month. We'll need you to pitch in more." I had a modest pension of $1,200. Without hesitation, I offered half $600 each month, thinking it was fair, thinking it would make me less of a burden. But fairness turned into expectation. Every time the gas or water bill rose, Kara's eyes flicked toward me, subtle but sharp. If Daniel had left lights blazing, if Mark had spilled juice on the rug, the unspoken blame always drifted in my direction. The kitchen became a battlefield of small humiliations. Some mornings, I would come down after my walk to find only breadcrumbs on the counter. When I asked about breakfast, Kara would shrug. We thought you'd already eaten. Other nights, when I lingered too long upstairs, I'd find the pots scrubbed clean, leftovers tucked away. We assumed you weren't hungry, and always the phrase delivered in the same even tone, wrapped in politeness, that cut sharper than cruelty. My hands stitched clothes late into the evening pants Daniel had torn at work costumes Ava needed for school. No one asked me if I minded. No one thanked me either. It was as though my skill was just another appliance in their house, expected to work on demand. When Robert lost his job, I reached deeper into my pocket. 18 months of my pension paid their mortgage while he looked for work. I told myself it was temporary, that once he was back on his feet, the balance would shift. But when he finally found another position, the gratitude I had hoped for never came. Instead, I was treated like an inconvenience, a lodger overstaying her welcome. There were moments of kindness, fleeting but deceptive. Ava's drawings taped to my bedroom wall, Mark's little hand slipping into mine during church. They kept me tethered, convinced me to stay longer than I should have. Yet each day was another small cut. A withheld meal. A sigh when I used the washing machine. A roll of Kara's eyes when I reminded her to check the oven. Cuts that by themselves seemed survivable, but together bled me dry. And so by the time Kara pressed her hand over my plate, that Christmas Eve, by the time she told me I hadn't contributed, the wound was already deep. It was not the first cut, not even the sharpest. It was simply the one that made me realize I had been bleeding all along. I don't remember how long I sat in that dining room after Kara's words, my plate still bare. Time blurred around me, broken only by the scrape of knives and the tinkling of glasses. My throat ached with unspoken words, but my lips stayed pressed together, as if silence could protect what little dignity I had left. Then a small sound drew my eyes. The quiet patter of bare feet against hardwood. Mark had slipped down from his chair. At 5 years old, his steps were clumsy, his socks sliding across the floor. In his little hand, he carried a piece of bread, a dinner roll so soft it had flattened in his grip. He came to my side, his face solemn, in a way a child's face shouldn't have to be. "Grandma," he whispered, tugging gently at my sleeve. "You look hungry. You can have mine." The words pierced me in a way Kara's cruelty never could. My grandson, too small to understand money or contribution or the bitterness of adults, had noticed the hollowness in my silence. He had seen hunger in my eyes, where his mother had chosen to see only judgment. I wanted to cry. I wanted to take the bread and hold him tight, to tell him that kindness like his was worth more than all the feasts in the world. But before I could answer, Kara's chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Mark." Her voice cracked across the table like a whip. The boy froze, his little shoulders stiff beneath his striped sweater. Kara rose, her hand extended not to comfort, but to command. "Go back to your seat," she said sharply. "Grandma is fine. She's learning responsibility." The room stilled again. Ava's fork clattered against her plate, her eyes darting from her brother to me. Daniel stared down at his wine, not lifting his gaze, not speaking. Robert chuckled under his breath, the sound low, ugly. Mark looked up at me, confusion clouding his round face. He held out the bread once more, as if asking silently if he should insist. My heart broke at his hesitation, at the way his small kindness had been stamped out by the very woman who should have nurtured it. I shook my head gently. "It's all right, sweetheart," I whispered, though my voice cracked. "Go on." He obeyed, trudging back to his chair, the bread still clutched in his fist. He climbed into his seat with the help of his sister and sat quietly, no longer, swinging his legs, no longer laughing. Ava slipped her hand into his under the table, a secret gesture of comfort I wasn't meant to see, but did. Kara smoothed her skirt and sat back down, satisfied, her smirk, faint but visible. "Children need boundaries," she announced to no one in particular, her voice dripping with the kind of righteousness that always disguised cruelty. I lowered my eyes to my lap. In that moment, I wasn't thinking of my empty stomach. I was thinking of what Mark had offered, his innocence, his compassion, and how quickly it had been silenced. I folded my hands tightly, holding them together to keep myself from trembling. The bread I had refused might have filled my stomach, but his gesture alone had filled something else, the empty place inside me that still longed for proof of love in that house. The clatter of forks resumed. Kara laughed at something Robert said, and Daniel joined in with a hollow chuckle. But my thoughts stayed with Mark and the soft roll in his hand now growing cold. I sat in silence, knowing that cruelty had just revealed itself more clearly than ever. And it wasn't in my hunger. It was in the way a child's kindness had been treated as disobedience. I closed my bedroom door behind me, pressing it shut with the care of someone trying not to break. The faint sounds of laughter and forks against porcelain floated up from below, muffled through the floorboards. They might as well have been echoes from another world. In my corner, the little artificial tree I had set up that very morning glowed with gentle white lights. I had decorated it for the children, tiny red bows, paper snowflakes. Ava had cut herself a string of silver beads I'd carried in a small box since the first Christmas David and I spent together. Now, in the dim of my room, the tree looked like a cruel parody of joy. I sank onto the edge of the bed. My hands trembled in my lap. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. They blurred the soft glow of the tree, turning the lights into shapeless stars. I pressed my fists against my eyes, ashamed of my weakness. But the sobs came anyway, ragged, quiet. The kind you don't want anyone to hear. I had given my life to family. I had bent my back at the sewing machine for 40 years to put food on the table, to buy Daniel his textbooks, to pay for the winter coats Kara now dismissed as trivial. I had sold my car to help with his college tuition. I had pressed every spare dollar into their hands when Robert was out of work. And yet, I had been denied bread at my own son's table. The shame seared me, but beneath it, something else stirred. A different kind of heat, slow, steady, spreading through my chest. Anger, yes, but more than that. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. David's voice came back to me. Not in sound exactly, but in memory, in the quiet way certain words can settle in your bones. Respect is the rent for a place in your life. He used to say that whenever someone took advantage of his kindness, when a friend forgot their debt or a neighbor overstepped, we pay for our place in each other's lives with respect, nothing else. I realized then that I had been paying more than my share of that rent for years, paying with my pension, with my labor, with my silence. Kara hadn't paid a cent. Daniel, my own son, had let his share slide too. Respect had been absent, and I had been pretending not to notice. I looked at the glowing tree again, the paper snowflakes drooping slightly at their edges. Ava's careful scissor work, Mark's lopsided bows. Their small hands had helped me make this little thing of beauty, not Kara's, not Daniel's. The innocence of children had reminded me of love, even as the adults forgot it. I wiped my cheeks and sat straighter. My tears dried on my skin, leaving a stiffness there that matched the resolve forming inside me. I would not stay invisible. I would not keep paying rent into a house where no one valued me. My gaze fell to the manila envelope on my desk. Inside were documents I had carried with me since David died, our marriage certificate, his will, my pension details. I had kept them safe, but unused. For the first time in years, I wondered what might happen if I put them to use. Downstairs, a cheer rose as Robert cracked a joke. I heard Kara laugh, her voice bright and hollow. The sound did not sting the way it had earlier. It only confirmed what I already knew. I turned off the small tree. The room sank into darkness except for the pale winter moon spilling through the curtains. My chest felt steadier now. The tears had left me lighter, emptied of grief, and filled with something else. Resolve. I lay back on the bed, folding the blanket over myself. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow would not be like today. Christmas morning arrived with a silence that felt heavier than the snow falling outside. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cloves and roasted meat, but it was the smell of leftovers of something already past. I moved quietly through the house, straightening a few ornaments on the tree, folding the blanket left on the couch. No one spoke to me at breakfast. No one asked how I'd slept. By late morning, Kara's voice rang out cheerfully, almost too cheerfully, as she pulled coats from the closet. "We're heading to the Christkindl market," she announced as though I were a distant relative who had no stake in their plans. She glanced at me only once, her expression polite, false. "Better if you stay and rest, Helena. You seemed tired yesterday." Daniel didn't look up from fastening Mark's scarf. He just nodded along. Ava waved at me with a small, uncertain smile, then let herself be led out the door. And then the house was empty. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the echo of the door closing behind them. My hands tingled, restless. The quiet pressed against me thick and suffocating. Something in my chest whispered that this was my only chance, my chance to see what truths they never spoke aloud. I went upstairs, my steps slow but steady, and into Daniel and Kara's bedroom. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a dull winter light. On the nightstand beside Kara's side of the bed lay her phone, plugged into its charger. My heart began to race. I told myself I had no right, that I had been raised to respect privacy even when mine had not been respected. But then I remembered last night, Kara's hand pressing down on my plate, her words slicing me open. "You didn't contribute, so you don't eat." I sat on the edge of the bed, picked up the phone, and turned it in my hands. My fingers trembled, but I knew her passcode. She had used it for years, Ava's birthday written in the same order on every password she owned. November 18th, 2015. My thumb tapped the numbers and the lock screen slid away with a soft chime. The phone opened to messages bright and unassuming. I scrolled past the ordinary clutter holiday greetings, school notices, grocery lists, until my eye caught a chat labeled Family SM. I opened it and my breath caught. Inside were messages between Kara Daniel and Christina Kara's younger sister, who lived across town. My son's name sat there in green bubbles, his words as damning as the others. "Daniel, I can't stand Mom in the house anymore. She's underfoot all day, and she acts like we owe her something. Kara, we just need her pension until we've saved enough. Then she'll go to Fernando Residence. She'll be well taken care of, and we'll finally have privacy back. Christina, a friend of mine worked there. It's cheap, $400 a month. With what she gives you, you'll still have $800 left over. Easy." My hands began to shake so badly I had to set the phone down on my lap, but I kept reading. Robert. He rarely wrote, but his words carried weight. When he did, "The problem is, if she finds out early and leaves, we'll lose the money. Just keep her happy until everything's set up." And Kara again. "That's why I put up with her fussy habits. But I'm losing patience. Yesterday, she asked me for special cookies like I'm her maid." I scrolled further, my stomach twisting tighter with every line. Pictures of the nursing home appeared, gray walls, a shared room with 4 narrow beds, hallways lit with harsh fluorescent lights. Kara's caption chilled me more than the photo. "Look how perfect this is. Far enough away that she can't bother us. And once she's settled, we can sell her dresser and some of her clothes. Extra cash." Then Daniel's reply, dated just 2 weeks ago. "I dreamed she finally passed away in that place. Honestly, it was a relief. We'd have the house to ourselves." The tears didn't come this time, not yet. I sat there cold, hollowed out. My son, my daughter-in-law, dreaming of my death as if it were a release, planning to sell the furniture that David and I had chosen together when we were young. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling my heart hammering. My breath was shallow, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I picked up the phone again and began to take photographs one by one. Each screen, each date, each message. I saved them to my own device, creating a record they could never deny. When I was finished, I laid Kara's phone back exactly as I had found it. Screen dark cord reattached. I stood, slowly, my knees stiff, but my back straighter than when I had entered. For 3 years, I had wondered if I was imagining it all, if the coldness in their eyes was just my loneliness painting shadows. But here in black and white were their intentions, their contempt, their plans for my future. And now that I knew the truth, I also knew there would be no going back. I sat for a long while on the edge of Kara's bed, the phone still heavy in my lap, though the screen had gone dark. The faint hum of the house seemed louder than usual, the furnace clicking on the wind, rattling a branch against the window pane. My hands steadied slowly, the tremor giving way to a chill that settled deep my bones. I picked the phone up again and checked each photo I had taken. Dozens of screenshots now lived in my gallery. Names, dates, cruel words spelled out in pixels. My son's contempt, Kara's cold calculations, Christina's helpful suggestions as though she were planning the disposal of old furniture instead of a human life. Each line was a nail in a coffin they had been quietly building for me. I saved the images to my own phone with deliberate care, ensuring the timestamps were visible. Then I tucked both devices back where they belonged, placing Kara's exactly as I had found it, cord plugged neatly into the nightstand charger. If she noticed anything, it would only be her own carelessness. Back in my room, I closed the door and leaned against it. My chest felt tight, but not from grief alone. There was a grim clarity pulsing in me, sharper than the ache. I sat at my desk, pulled out a notebook I had kept for grocery lists and sewing patterns, and opened to a clean page. I began to write. Not in paragraphs, not in prose, just dates. Moments, small humiliations strung together like beads. March 2021, moved in after David's death, agreed to contribute $600 monthly. April 2021, Kara said the electricity bill was too high and suggested I was at fault. September 2021, Robert, out of work. I paid mortgage from pension for 18 months. November 2022 came down for breakfast. Only crumbs left, told we thought you ate already. July 2023, asked to buy my own groceries separately to keep track of expenses. The list stretched on and on, each line a cut I had endured quietly, convincing myself it was nothing, convincing myself that families sometimes stumbled in their kindness. Now, seeing it written down, the pattern was undeniable. I turned to a fresh page and wrote the sentence that had replayed in my head since last night: "You didn't contribute, so you don't eat." Under it, I wrote Kara's plan for Fernando residence. I added Daniel's dream of my death. Looking at those words in my own handwriting, I finally understood. I was not a guest here, not family, not loved. I was a revenue stream, a means to their comfort, a placeholder until they could shuffle me into a corner of the city to wither away out of sight. The weight of that realization pressed down hard. My first instinct was to crumble under it, to weep again, but I did not. I closed the notebook carefully, laid my pen across the cover, and set both into the drawer of my nightstand. Evidence in writing and in images. A record of what they had done and what they planned to do. I rose and went to the window. Outside, the snow had thickened, covering the yard in white silence. Children's footprints from the morning were already vanishing beneath it. The world was erasing their marks quickly, as if nothing had happened at all. But my memory would not erase. The cage I had been living in revealed itself to me fully that day, not made of iron bars, but of silence, of obligation, of carefully constructed lies. And now that I saw it clearly, I knew I had two choices: to stay inside until they discarded me, or to find the key and walk out before it was too late. I stood by the window until the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke my trance. They were back from the market, laughing faintly as they carried packages up the walk. I closed the curtains, sat on the bed, and steadied my breath. The evidence was mine. The truth was mine. And soon, the decision would be mine too. That night, while the others slept off their Christmas wine and laughter, I lay awake in the narrow bed that had never felt like mine. The glow of the small tree in my corner flickered faintly, a reminder of what I had tried to build here and of how little it mattered. The notebook in my drawer was heavier than any secret I had ever carried. Each word, each date, each screenshot now lived inside it like testimony. But evidence I knew meant nothing unless paired with action. I rose quietly, my knees stiff, and opened the closet. A single suitcase sat in the corner, one I had not touched since I arrived 3 years ago. I pulled it onto the bed and unzipped it. The sound was louder than I wanted, and I froze, listening. The house was still. I folded clothes carefully. 2 sweaters, 3 blouses, a pair of trousers I had mended so often that the seams bore my fingerprints. My medications went into a side pocket, bottles rattling as softly as I could manage. Then I reached for the small wooden box on my nightstand. Inside were photographs of David on our wedding day at the lakeshore, holding a kite for Daniel in his armchair with a book in hand. I slid them gently between layers of clothing. He would come with me in the only way he could. The suitcase looked pitiful, half empty, but it was enough, more than enough. When the essentials were packed, I sat at the desk and took out a sheet of stationery. My hand hovered over the page for a long time before the words came. Dear Daniel and Kara, after much reflection, I have decided it is time for me to live in a place where I can have peace and respect. This house was meant to be a refuge, but I now understand that my presence here creates more tension than joy. I do not wish to be a burden to you or the children. For that reason, I am leaving. Please know that Ava and Mark will always be my beloved grandchildren. Nothing can change that. I hope when they are older, they will understand that Grandma chose dignity, not distance. I leave you the gifts I bought for them under the tree. They deserve joy even when adults falter. This decision has not been easy, but it is necessary. I wish you both the life you wanted, privacy, freedom, and a home of your own making. I only ask one thing in return, that you remember what respect costs, and that you pay it forward to those who come after me. With love, Helena. I read the letter once more, steadying my breath as I folded it. The words carried no bitterness, only truth. I placed it neatly on my pillow, smoothing the edges so it would be the first thing they saw when they noticed I was gone. But before I could leave, I needed to know I had somewhere to go. My hand shook slightly as I picked up the phone from the nightstand and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Hello? The voice was warm, surprised. Patricia, I whispered. It's Helena. There was a pause, then a rush of recognition. Helena Marlowe. My goodness, it's been so long. How are you? I closed my eyes, fighting the swell in my throat. Not well, Patricia. I need help, and I didn't know who else to call. Her tone softened instantly. Say no more. You'll come here. I've got the guest room. You'll stay as long as you need. You know this house has always been open to you. Tears pricked my eyes again, but these were different. Relief, not despair. Thank you, I managed. Patricia Moreno had been my neighbor for decades in Lincoln Park before David passed and before I lost my footing in the world. She had been there when he was sick, when I couldn't leave the apartment without breaking down. If anyone could help me reclaim myself, it was her. When I ended the call, my suitcase sat ready at the foot of the bed, the letter waiting on the pillow. The house was still, but inside me, something had shifted. I was no longer waiting for rescue. I was preparing to walk out on my own. The house was silent when I carried my suitcase down the narrow staircase. My letter waited upstairs on the pillow, the last trace of me in that place. I paused in the hallway, looking once toward the glowing tree in the living room, the gifts beneath it, untouched. Ava's paper snowflakes curled slightly at the edges, and Mark's bows sagged. My heart clenched, but I did not falter. The taxi arrived just after 7. Its headlights cut across the snow-laced driveway beams, bouncing off drifts that lined the curb. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The air burned my lungs sharp and clean, as if it were washing away the staleness I had been breathing for years. The driver, a middle-aged man with salt in his hair, lifted my suitcase into the trunk without a word. I slid into the back seat, the vinyl cool against my palms. Where to? He asked, his breath clouding the air. I gave him Patricia's address in Lincoln Park. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The car eased into the quiet Chicago streets, tires crunching over fresh snow. Street lamps cast cones of golden light, turning flakes into silver dust that swirled around us. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched the neighborhoods slide by. Houses dressed in Christmas lights blurred into streaks of red and green. I wondered how many families sat laughing inside, passing plates of turkey and pies, not knowing that a woman just like them was slipping away from her own. My reflection in the glass looked pale-lined, but my eyes glimmered with something unfamiliar resolve. The driver hummed along softly to a carol playing on the radio. Silent Night, the melody floating like a lullaby. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like crying when I heard it. The silence around me wasn't cruel this time. It was calm. We crossed the river, its black surface reflecting the bridges strung with lights. I thought of David, how he had once walked me along these banks after a winter movie date, both of us shivering but too young to care. His voice echoed in me. Respect is the rent for a place in your life. Tonight, for the first time, I was collecting what was owed. The taxi slowed on a quieter street lined with brick apartments. Patricia's building stood near the corner, a soft glow spilling from a window. I recognized even after all these years. She must have been waiting. The driver set my suitcase on the sidewalk. "You're home," he said simply. Home. The word stung my chest. I nodded, pressed a bill into his hand, and whispered my thanks. Patricia opened the front door before I could ring. She was smaller than I remembered, her hair streaked fully gray now, but her eyes were the same warm, steady. "Helena," she said, her voice breaking into a smile. "Come in before you freeze." Inside, her apartment smelled of cinnamon and coffee, the rich, comforting kind of scent that clings to sweaters and wood furniture. A small wreath hung crookedly on the wall, and a kettle hissed gently on the stove. The space wasn't grand, but it wrapped around me like a quilt. She took my coat, set my suitcase aside, and pressed a mug of cocoa into my hands. "You don't need to explain tonight," she said softly. "Rest first. Everything else can wait." I wanted to tell her everything to spill the poison I'd been swallowing, but the warmth of her voice unraveled me. I only nodded, tears stinging my eyes, and let her guide me to the guest room. The bed was simple, dressed in a faded quilt, but when I lay down, my body sank into it as if it had been waiting for me. Outside, snow fell steadily, muffling the city's sounds. For the first time in years, I closed my eyes without fear of reproach, without bracing for the sound of sharp voices. Sleep came quickly, not out of exhaustion alone, but because I was safe. The morning after I arrived at Patricia's, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of snowplows scraping the streets below. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw the faded quilt, the soft light of her window, and I remembered I was safe. We sat together at her small kitchen table, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs. Patricia didn't pry, though her eyes lingered on me with the concern of someone who knew more than she let on. When I told her I needed to take care of some business downtown, she simply nodded. "Do what you need to, Helena. You've got a place here." By late morning, I was riding the bus down Michigan Avenue, the snow turning to slush beneath the tires. The familiar stone facade of the First National Bank loomed ahead, the same branch where David and I had opened our accounts years ago. Walking through those glass doors felt like stepping back into a world where I still had choices. A young teller greeted me, but I asked to speak directly with an account manager. Soon, I was seated across from Julian, a man I remembered faintly from past visits, calm, courteous, always with his tie knotted just so. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said, with a polite smile. "How can we help you today?" I folded my hands tightly in my lap before I spoke. "I need to make some changes to my accounts." "Immediately." He nodded and began typing. "What sort of changes?" The words came easier than I expected. "First, remove my daughter-in-law, Kara Marlowe, as a joint holder on my checking account. Effective today, she is to have no further access." His fingers paused above the keyboard. He looked up at me, professional, but curious. "Of course. I'll need your written confirmation, and the reason personal circumstances," I said firmly, "but the decision is final." He didn't press. Papers slid across the desk and I signed them with a steady hand. For the first time in 3 years, no one else's name would sit beside mine. Next, I continued. "I want to cancel all automatic transfers connected to that account." especially the $600 monthly withdrawal into Kara and Daniel's household fund, and the auto debit for Robert's car insurance. Julian adjusted his glasses. That's $120 monthly, correct? Yes. Effective immediately. He clicked a few keys, printed confirmations, and laid them before me. One by one, I signed away the ties that had bound me. And finally, I said, my voice low but resolute, I want my pension redirected into a new account. In my name only. Issue me a new debit card, no shared access. Julian smiled faintly, perhaps recognizing something in my tone. We can set that up today. Would you like to explore a savings product as well? A fixed-term deposit, perhaps? For the first time, I let myself exhale a little. Yes, I said. Let's talk about that. The meeting stretched nearly an hour. By the time I stepped back onto Michigan Avenue, the wind sharp against my cheeks. My shoulders felt lighter than they had in years. My money earned through decades of bent backs, tired hands, and early mornings at the sewing machine was mine again. No more joint accounts, no more automatic drains into someone else's needs. No more being treated as a living pension check. I stopped on the corner watching traffic surge past and felt an unfamiliar steadiness settle inside me. The bank card in my pocket wasn't just plastic. It was proof that I could still stand on my own, even after years of being chipped away. The city noise swirled around me, honking horns, bus brakes squealing, Christmas shoppers chattering. But beneath it, I carried a quiet, private sound. The click of locks unfastening, the creak of a door opening inward. For the first time in years, my life and my money belonged to me alone. The day after I visited the bank, Patricia and I shared a quiet breakfast of buttered toast and coffee. The snow outside had begun to melt into slush, and the city's hum seeped through the windows. For the first time in years, I felt no obligation to rush, no weight, pulling me into a kitchen where I wasn't wanted. It was mid-morning when my phone began to ring. The screen lit with Daniel's name. I let it go dark. A minute later, it rang again. And again. 10 calls in less than half an hour. By noon, the tally stood at 15. Each time I ignored it, a new voicemail appeared. Patricia raised her eyebrows as she poured us both another cup. They've noticed, she said simply. I set the phone face down on the table, but curiosity gnawed at me. Finally, I pressed play. Mom Daniel's voice spilled out frantic, high-pitched in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. Where are you? Kara found your letter. We're worried sick. Ava and Mark are asking for you. Please just call me back. We can talk about this. Another message followed. Kara, this time her tone syrupy, coated with a sweetness that rang false. Helena, I'm so sorry about Christmas Eve. I was stressed I didn't mean what I said. You know I value you. Please come home. We can make this right. Then Daniel again, sharper now. Mom, this isn't fair. You can't just disappear. We had commitments, bills, groceries. You know we counted on your help. At least tell us where you are so we can figure this out together. By the end of the afternoon, my phone showed 23 missed calls and 7 voicemails. I listened to some, let others pile up. The pattern was clear: panic, then guilt, then pleading, then anger. Not once did I hear the words that mattered. Not once did they say, we love you. We're sorry for hurting you. Only we need you. We're worried you can't leave like this. Patricia leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me with the frankness only an old friend can have. Funny, she said dryly, how love sounds exactly like bills unpaid. I laughed, though it came out brittle. She wasn't wrong. Every voicemail dripped with desperation, but the kind measured in dollars, not devotion. By evening, I turned the phone off altogether. The silence felt like a gift. Patricia and I cooked dinner together, roast chicken. Nothing fancy, but shared in real companionship. No smirks, no sharp remarks, just 2 women passing the salt and telling stories of the past. Later, as we sat with our tea, Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand. They'll keep calling. They'll try everything. Don't let their noise shake what you've built today. I nodded, my chest tightening with something that felt like both grief and relief. Grief for the family I had, wanted relief that I could finally see the truth without excuses. When I went to bed that night, I didn't check my phone. I slid it into the drawer of the bedside table and closed it firmly. The city hummed outside. The radiator ticked softly, and the only sound that mattered was the steady rhythm of my own breathing. For the first time in years, I chose silence over explanation. The morning after I silenced my phone, Patricia and I sat with steaming mugs of coffee, the window cracked just enough to let in the smell of wet. The city had softened under slush and mist, the noise of traffic muted. For once, my shoulders were light. Then came the sharp buzz of the doorbell. Once, then again, insistent. Patricia peeked through the curtain, her brows knitting. "Helena, it's Kara. And the children. She looks desperate." My stomach turned, but I steadied myself. "Don't let her in," I said. "I'll handle it." I stepped out onto the narrow balcony above the entry. The iron railing was cold beneath my palms. Below, Kara stood clutching Ava's hand. Mark huddled against her side. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but her performance was intact. "Helena," she cried, her voice breaking like a rehearsed plea. "Please, just come down. We only need 5 minutes. The children miss you. They've been crying every night." Ava looked up, her cheeks, blotched eyes wet. "Grandma, why don't you come home? Mommy says it's our fault you left." My chest cracked at those words, but anger steadied me. They were using the children, now twisting innocence into leverage. I leaned against the railing, my voice low but firm. "Ava, sweetheart, it's not your fault. It's never your fault. You and Mark have done nothing wrong." Kara's face tightened, her hand squeezing Ava's shoulder. "Helena, you're scaring them. Please stop this and come down. We can talk. We can fix things." I let the silence stretch a beat, then said the words I knew would cut through the performance. "Fernando residence." Her head jerked up, her mouth parted, but no sound came. I continued, my voice steady, every syllable deliberate. 4 beds per room, $400 a month. Far enough that I couldn't come back every 2 days. That's what you wrote, Kara. That's what you planned with Daniel and your sister. Don't you dare stand here pretending you want me home. The color drained from her face. Her grip on Ava faltered, her eyes darting toward Patricia's window as if witnesses might appear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. "Yes, you do." I lifted my phone slightly, not enough for details to show, but enough for her to understand. "I have the messages. I have every word, selling my dresser, dreaming of my death. Do you want me to read them aloud to your children?" Mark clung tighter to her coat, his small face confused, frightened. Kara's lips trembled. She looked up at me, stripped of her composure, now caught between denial and fear. "Mom, please don't call me that." I cut in, my voice sharper than I'd intended. The word mom felt poisoned in her mouth. A mother doesn't scheme to discard the woman who raised her. A daughter-in-law doesn't plan a nursing home like it's a storage unit. And Daniel, my own son, joined you. What's left between us now isn't family. It's calculation. For a moment, the only sound was the shuffle of Ava's shoes on the pavement. Then Kara tried again, her voice cracking. "I was overwhelmed. We needed help. I didn't mean you meant every word I said." My voice calmer now. "And now you face the truth you tried to hide." Patricia appeared beside me on the balcony, her arms folded, gaze steady. Kara noticed and pulled the children closer, shame flickering across her face. Finally, Kara turned, ushering Ava and Mark toward the car. But before she left, she looked back up, her voice hoarse. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said quietly. "Disrespect already did that." She flinched, then hurried the children down the street. Ava turned, once her eyes meeting mine, pleading, innocent. My heart ached, but I stood tall. On the balcony, the cold wind bit my cheeks. The truth was spoken now, and there would be no going back. It was only a matter of time before Daniel himself appeared. 2 nights after Kara's performance on the doorstep, the pounding came, loud, violent, rattling Patricia's front door. "Helena," his voice carried up the stairwell, harsh, stripped of the politeness he'd always worn like a borrowed suit. "Get down here right now. We need to talk." Patricia and I exchanged a glance at the kitchen table. She set down her teacup with deliberate calm. "Do you want me to answer?" she asked. "No," I said, though my heart was hammering. "I will." I stepped onto the balcony once more. Daniel stood on the sidewalk below his coat, half-buttoned, his hair wild from the wind. He looked older than his 39 years, but not with wisdom, only with bitterness. "There you are," he barked, jabbing a finger upward. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Walking out like that, canceling transfers. We counted on your money, Mom. The mortgage, the kids' school costs. You've thrown everything into chaos." The word money hit me like a stone. Not love, not family, not even respect. Just money. "I counted on respect, Daniel," I said evenly. "I counted on being treated like more than a wallet. And I was wrong." His face darkened. "Stop playing the victim. You lived in my house, ate our food, used our heat. You think $600 covered that you've been freeloading off me." The lie burned hot in my chest, but I refused to let it choke me. Freeloading. My voice rose sharp and clear against the winter air. "I paid your mortgage for 18 months. I cooked your meals, cleaned your home, cared for your children. I gave more than money, I gave myself. And still you schemed to discard me." He froze just a fraction, then snarled, "You had no right to go through Kara's phone. I had every right to know what my son thought of me, what my son dreamed of my death as a relief for a heartbeat silence." His mouth opened closed, then rage overtook him. "You're selfish. You've ruined us. If you don't come back, I swear enough." Patricia's voice cut through the air, firm and commanding. She had stepped out beside me, her phone in hand. "Daniel Marlowe, I've already called the police. Keep shouting threats in front of witnesses, and you'll find yourself in handcuffs before midnight." He looked up, startled, caught between fury and fear. His fists clenched, then unclenched. "This isn't over," he spat finally. "You'll regret this." "No," I said, my voice steady as the wind whipped against us. "I regret staying as long as I did." Daniel turned sharply, stomping down the sidewalk, his figure swallowed by the darkness of the street. Patricia exhaled beside me, sliding her phone back into her pocket. "Well," she said, her tone dry but warm, "I think the mask has finally slipped." I leaned on the railing, my hands steady now. My son's voice had risen against me, cruel and unrecognizable, and for the first time I hadn't flinched. Weeks slipped by quietly in Patricia's apartment. The snow melted into gray slush, then froze again under the bite of January winds. My days began to fill with small, steady rhythms. Morning coffee, a walk to the market evenings, with Patricia, watching old films or knitting side by side. For the first time in years, I felt my life belonged to me. But news has a way of finding you, even when you don't go looking for it. Mercedes, an old neighbor from our building, ran into Patricia at the pharmacy. She mentioned casually that Daniel and Kara's house was up for sale. "No sign in the yard," she said, "but people have been coming to view it. They can't keep up anymore." The words landed in me like a quiet echo, not a shock. I had known it would come to this. Without my pension flowing into their hands, their math no longer worked. A week later, another piece of news arrived. Ava and Mark had been pulled from their private school and enrolled in the public one down the road. Patricia's cousin, whose granddaughter attended there, mentioned it with a shrug. "They say it's temporary," she added, but we both knew better. Then came the proof I hadn't expected. One cold Sunday morning in March, Patricia and I wandered through the flea market near Halstead, browsing among rows of chipped china and second-hand coats. I wasn't looking for anything, just enjoying the freedom of walking through a crowd without feeling like an intruder in my own life. That was when I saw it, David's dresser. The same one he and I had bought on our first anniversary, saving for months to afford it. Oak solid, scarred a little from decades of use. I had kept my wedding album in its top drawer. Daniel's first report cards in the second scraps of fabric, from dresses I had sewn in the bottom. Now it stood tilted in the cold air, its knobs dulled a tag, hanging from one handle, $150. I stepped closer, my breath catching. My hand hovered above the wood, aching to touch it, but I stopped just short. The vendor, an older man with a wool cap, noticed. "Solid piece," he said. "Family sold it last week? Shame, really. But folks don't want heavy furniture anymore. Hard to move." I nodded, faintly. "Yes," I murmured. "Hard to move." Patricia glanced at me, her eyes soft, with unspoken understanding. "Do you want it back?" she asked gently. For a long moment I thought I did, that buying it would restore something, proof that not everything could be taken from me. But as I stood there watching dust settle into the grooves of its wood, I realized the truth. That dresser no longer held my life. My memories of David weren't locked in drawers, they were here in me. No, I said, finally stepping back. It belongs to the past now. We walked on, leaving it behind. My chest was tight, but not with grief, more with release. Some people might have mourned the loss, might have cursed the cheap price at which their history had been sold. But I found a strange peace in letting it go. That chapter was closed, and I no longer needed a piece of furniture to tell me who I was. By April, the rhythm of my new life had begun to feel steady. Patricia and I shared our days like clockwork, shopping at the corner market, tending to her small balcony plants, talking late into the evening about everything and nothing. I almost convinced myself the shadows of my old house couldn't reach me here. Then one afternoon, Patricia came in from the lobby holding an envelope. My name was written across it in Kara's hand, each letter pressed too hard, as if guilt had weighed on the pen. I didn't open it right away. I turned it over, tracing the flap, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. Part of me wanted to toss it in the wastebasket, but Patricia only touched my shoulder gently and said, "Better to know what's inside than imagine it worse." At the kitchen table, I slid it open. "Dear Helena, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What happened on Christmas Eve was cruel, and I see now how deeply I hurt you. I was overwhelmed, angry at our struggles, and I took it out on you. That was wrong. You are not a burden. You are Daniel's mother, the children's grandmother. You are family, and we treated you as if you were not. The house is gone. The bills swallowed us whole. I have learned what it means to be without help, and I am ashamed of how I twisted your help into something else. If you can find it in your heart, I hope we can start again. If not, I understand." The words lay flat on the page, remorseful, but neat, too measured. My heart wanted to believe them, but my mind remembered the smirk on her face as she pressed my plate down, the sound of Daniel's voice spitting that I was selfish, the chat messages with Christina calculating my future like a ledger. The ache inside me sharpened. A second envelope lay tucked behind the first, smaller, with crayon markings across the back. My breath caught as I slid out 2 folded sheets of paper. Ava's careful hand had drawn me with silver hair, sitting beside a Christmas tree, a heart floating above. In block letters she had written, "I miss you, Grandma." Mark's was messier, bold streaks of blue and red forming what I realized was supposed to be a house. 3 figures stood outside it, holding hands, 2 children, and a taller woman with gray hair. Beneath it, he had scrawled, "Come home." Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. The letters from Kara had stirred suspicion, but the drawings from the children broke through every defense. Their world was simple. Grandma loved them, and they wanted her back. I set the pictures gently on the table, smoothing out the creases with trembling fingers. Patricia watched me quietly. "It's easier to forgive children," she said softly. "Yes," I whispered, "because they never betrayed me." But even as I said it, the canyon between me and the adults yawned wide. Could crayon lines and innocent wishes bridge such a chasm, or would they only remind me of what had been lost forever? I gathered the drawings into a small folder, separate from Kara's letter. One was a wound, reopening. The other, a balm. I couldn't quite let go. It was late in the evening when Patricia brought me the phone. "It's Daniel," she said carefully, her eyes narrowing. "Do you want to take it?" For a long moment I didn't answer. My instinct was to refuse to let the call vanish into silence, as so many of his had before. But something inside me, curiosity maybe, or the echo of the boy he once was, made me nod. I held the phone to my ear, bracing. "Mom." His voice was lower than I remembered, stripped of the anger I had last heard on Patricia's street. It was raw, hesitant. "Please don't hang up. I need to say something." I stayed silent, waiting. "I know Kara's words that night were cruel," he said. Slowly, each word pulled like a thread, but I was worse. I didn't say anything. I sat there and let it happen. "You were standing with an empty plate in your own son's house, and I let you be humiliated." The memory flashed sharp and cold, but I didn't speak. He pressed on. I told myself I was keeping the peace. That silence was better than making things worse in front of the kids. But the truth is I was complicit. My silence was agreement. And you deserved more than that. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his admissions sink in. For years I had carried the sting of his silence more than Kara's sharp tongue, more than Robert's smirk. His absence, his refusal to see me, had cut the deepest. Hearing him name it now felt like a stitch pulled too late on a torn seam. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I know it doesn't erase anything. I know you don't owe me forgiveness. But I needed you to hear me say it." I breathed slowly, my fingers tightening around the phone. When I spoke, my words were measured, not harsh, but not soft either. "Daniel, I waited years for you to stand up for me. Years. And when the moment came, you turned away. That silence taught me exactly where I stood in your life." "I know," he whispered, "and I'll carry that." A long pause stretched between us, filled with everything that could not be undone. I wanted to tell him I remembered the boy who used to hold my hand, crossing streets, the young man who once called me his anchor, but the years of silence stood taller than memory. "Thank you for saying the words," I said at last. "They matter, but they don't erase the past, and they don't mean I can go back to it." I heard him inhale shaky, then exhale. "I understand," he said. "I'll try to do better for Ava and Mark at least." "Do that," I replied, "for them." When the call ended, I set the phone down gently. My heart was heavy, but not with regret. His apology was years too late to heal the wound, but it was proof that even silence can break eventually. In the days after Daniel's call, I found myself staring at Kara's letter again and at the children's crayon drawings. They sat in a small folder on Patricia's desk, waiting like questions I hadn't yet answered. At last, I took out a sheet of paper and began to write. My words were clear, deliberate. "I will agree to meet you, but only on neutral ground, never in your home. There will be no financial support, no transfers, no entanglements. If you want me in your lives, it will be on the currency of respect, nothing else. If you can accept those terms, we will find a way forward. If not, then my silence will stand as my answer." I signed my name, folded the letter, and mailed it. The act felt less like reopening a door and more like building a boundary strong enough to stand. Months passed. Life with Patricia grew into something steady, almost joyful. We hosted small suppers for neighbors, volunteered at the library, and tended herbs on the balcony that thrived despite the city's chill. My heart still ached for Ava and Mark, but now I carried them differently. Less as a wound, more as a reminder of why boundaries mattered. The next Christmas, Patricia's apartment glowed with candlelight. She had invited a handful of friends from the neighborhood widows' retirees, a young couple from upstairs who brought fresh bread. The table was crowded, not with grand feasts, but with laughter hands, passing dishes, stories weaving across the room. I sat at the head not because I demanded it, but because Patricia insisted. In that circle of warmth, I realized something profound. Family is not only the blood that binds you. Family is those who honor your presence, who treat your seat at the table as earned by love, not bought with sacrifice. As I raised my glass, David's voice echoed in my memory, steady as ever. "Respect is the rent for a place in your life." I smiled, whispering the words aloud so only I could hear them. "Respect, not money, is the rent for a place in my life."